my heart just goes out to his family, his mum and dad, his sisters, his son, and even to Cheryl. I'm still in shock, to be quite honest with you. I was so fearful that something would happen, and I tried to reach out a good few times recently, because I know that he'd been going through a bit of a tough time. And, you know, we're still waiting for confirmation as to what actually happened. But still, I'm still in shock. I really, genuinely, I just cannot believe it. It's just, it's so tragic, it's awful.
31, no age at all. Let's go back to when you first met Liam Payne back in 2010 at X Factor, both so young, in your teens. You met him during the auditions and you went all the way through to the final stages of the competition together. What was he like in those early days?
He was my absolute pillar of strength, to be transparent. I'm just closing my eyes because all I can see is his big smile. And that's what would just stand out. Every time he'd walk into the room, I mean, he would be so happy and he'd just give that big smile. I remember when we met, I think this was during boot camp, and there was just a bunch of us outside the hotel in Wembley, and I remember Niall Horan was playing the guitar, and we were all just sitting around and just being silly and singing songs, and we all had such a passion for music, and it just made us all so happy, but little did we know what we were actually in for at all, and I think that's what brought us all so much closer. And with Liam, I mean, he was so grounding, he was so kind to everyone, he always put everybody else first. He was really there for me through some pretty horrific times during the X Factor that I personally went through. And he was there for me during the tour, and then even after the tour had finished. He was just a solid friend with a kind heart, a kind soul, and with such a love and passion for music.
Katie, when you talk about your experience of the X Factor, and we've spoken about it before on this programme, you and others did not have a good experience and carry a lot of trauma, PTSD, mental health issues, all sorts of issues from that programme, and it comes back to allegations of terrible safeguarding, all the things you've mentioned on record before. But One Direction seemed to be the exception to that in terms of they went on to huge global fame and looked, to all intents and purposes, very well looked after. But we do know that Liam Payne, not so many years ago, publicly touched on the fact that he struggled with addiction and mental health issues. How much do you trace that back to fame so young and the pressures of it?
I think that perception, or the perception of how One Direction were getting on, the outside world, one would typically and understandably think just that they were the untouchables. But that's not the case whatsoever. I mean, we have all trauma bonded through a shared and similar experience in one which way, shape or form. And especially when the band went on a hiatus and the boys went solo, it is, I think, when they started to find their own feet and their own voice, not just from a singing standpoint, but also digesting what had happened during that process. You know, they were so young during the X Factor. And also, to be very frank and transparent, and I think I've said this to you before, once you've been on that show and or associated or affiliated with the likes of, say, Simon Cowell or Psycho Entertainment, you are cattle branded. That's your identity. No matter what you do, that's your identity. And when you're trying to branch away from that, it's very difficult from a mental health standpoint to then re-find your own identity and life purpose if you were perhaps taking, I guess, a different direction in life. But when it comes to addiction and so on and so forth, I mean, it's been rife in the industry for many years. a lot of the times people self-medicate because they're struggling and they don't trust anyone, they don't know who to turn to. And I completely relate and understand, and my heart breaks because there's been many a time that I had found myself in a not very nice place, mentally and emotionally, just in despair. And my mum just moments ago, she called me and she said, "I'm so proud of you, Katie, and that you had the strength to just push through and break through and get through it all." Because it just, from the get-go, from that show, irrespective of whether you were an auditionee or on the live shows or found huge success like One Direction, every person is still severely impacted because there is no duty of care or welfare or guidance or support or anything to help you process and digest what on earth you've been through.
Katie, I just want to read something from social media. This was from Rebecca Ferguson, also a finalist in 2010, part of your X Factor alumni. She put this on social media about Liam. "We both met at Euston Station and shared the taxi together to X Factor, young, innocent and unaffected by fame. I can't help but think of that boy who was hopeful and looking forward to his bright future ahead. If he hadn't jumped on that train and jumped in that taxi, I believe he would be alive today. I've spoken for years about the exploitation and profiteering of young stars and the effects. Many of us are still living with the aftermath and the PTSD. Many of us are devastated and reflective today as it has finally taken its first victim." That's quite a statement, isn't it, about how so many of you feel about your experience of reality television and fame at such a young age. You always ask, at what cost?
Fame is part of the territory, but fame in our eyes would be people knowing who we were for our music. You know, I don't think it's the pressures of fame. I think that what happened behind the scenes of that, you know, the type of stories that would be drip-fed in, the narration to work in favour of a television show, which in one aspect, fine. If the TV show wants to make money, I don't mind, sure, but tell us. Don't drag us through the trenches on that and not be transparent. Provide support, provide help, because it creates a long-lasting and severe impact. And we have lost too many people in this industry. We've lost many people in the music industry, film, television, and it's one too many, and it needs to be looked into.
Katie, 31, no age at all, but Liam Payne packed in more than somebody 3 times his age into his life. His impact on pop music, his global celebrity. They were described, One Direction, as the Beatles of their generation. They were so big. You can't underestimate, whether you're a fan of One Direction or not, the huge impact they had on popular culture, that legacy.
Yes, absolutely. And their legacy will forever live on. And, you know, I'm incredibly proud of all of the boys, individually and how they worked so wonderfully together. You know, they auditioned for that show as solo artists and were thrown into a position that they didn't quite expect, and they became close friends, and they made history with that. And how wonderful. And so it's important to remember also the good times and champion them and champion them for that. And with Liam, his story will be told, and rightfully so. And his music will live on forever.